7th, 8th, 2014. Okay, so we'll begin with homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we come to Sutta number 120 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is in Pali, it's called Sankhar Upapatti Sutta. And the translation, the title that was given by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli is Reappearance by Aspiration. But I don't particularly like Venerable Nyanamoli's rendering of Upapatti by reappearance. It seems to suggest that first one disappears in one place and then reappears someplace else. But the word upapatti is always used to signify what we would now call rebirth. And so I would now title this Rebirth by Aspiration, or Rebirth in accordance with one's aspiration. And originally I hoped to come to this sutta according to the original schedule. It was to come, well, in the same place after finishing the discourse on mindfulness of breathing, and then the discourse on mindfulness of the body, and then before we come to the 2 suttas on emptiness. But I thought it would come according to the original schedule while we are going from week to week, and it would serve as a little bit like a sort of light interlude between those heavy and more technical suttas. Because of my schedule of going to California, now it comes at the beginning after a long interval of no classes. But it just struck me that maybe the compilers of the canon put this sutta here for the very same purpose, to give like a little break between those rather heavy and technical suttas, and to sort of lighten up the atmosphere a bit. Okay, and so this sutta is, so maybe you could say it is directed, unlike the others that come before it and after, which are directed sort of exclusively and intensely upon those who are seeking immediate liberation from the round of birth and death. This sutta is primarily directed for those who still feel themselves not yet ready to make the full endeavor to reach liberation, but are trying to work their way gradually from life to life as part of a gradual path to liberation. And so the Buddha, first he calls the attention of the monks, and then he says to the monks, I shall teach you. And then here we have Sankharupapatti, which is translated reappearance in accordance with one's aspiration. And one of the key words here in this phrase is sankhara. And the word sankhara, it has various uses in Buddhism. One of the most common uses is to signify all conditioned phenomena. That is, all the phenomena of mind and body, all physical and mental phenomena that arise through the cooperative functioning of conditions. So anything that arises through causes and conditions is called a sankhara. But another meaning of the word sankhara, which is prominent in the formula for dependent origination, is specifically as volitional activity. That is the force of volition, or volition as a force that determines one's future destiny, particularly as the volitional activities that will generate the new consciousness in the next existence, and thereby set in motion the process of new existence, of repeated becoming. And I think that's the original meaning of sankhara here. That is, sankhara as a volitional activity which is going to determine rebirth. But the commentary to the sutta, from the broader commentary, the larger commentary to the Majjhima Nikaya, here glosses the word sankhara by another Pali word, patana, or Sanskrit, prarthana. Which can be translated as aspiration. And so it's common in Buddhist countries, in traditional Buddhist countries, for people to make particular patanas or aspirations to be reborn in particular realms of existence. Of course, very few Buddhists expect to reach final liberation right here and now. And even to reach liberation here and now, generally one has to do so through the force of one's aspiration. But many people make a patana or prarthana to be reborn in a particular realm of existence. Is this the case in Sri Lanka, Venerable Subodha? They use the word petuma. Yeah, so petuma is the singular form of Sanskrit prarthana.
Yes, you use prarthana too.
You use prarthana too. And people make the aspiration, I hear it at the end of dana offerings, or actually at the beginning, may I be reborn in heaven after heaven after heaven. And then during the time of Maitreya Buddha, may I be reborn in a good family here on earth and come into contact with Maitreya Buddha and hear his teaching and realize the paths and fruits. Okay, but it's not enough to be reborn in accordance with one's aspiration. It's not enough just to have the aspiration or wish, but one also has to establish certain supporting conditions. So in this sutta, the Buddha is going to explain the supporting conditions for rebirth in various desirable and superior modes of rebirth. Okay, so he begins by saying that here, this is in paragraph 3, a bhikkhu possesses faith, virtue, learning, generosity, and wisdom. Then he thinks, oh, that on the dissolution or breakup of the body, after death, I might reappear, or better you could say, I may be reborn in the company of well-to-do nobles. These are the Khatiyas or Kshatriyas. So of course the Buddha is speaking to people in India, so he's formulating this in terms of the Indian class system. So in India, the social classes, or the society, was divided into 4 main social classes. In the Buddha's way of speaking, he puts the Kshatriyas, the nobles, the aristocrats, on top, and then in the second place he puts the Brahmins, the priests who preserve the Vedic traditions. But from the Brahmin perspective, when they formulate the class system, they put the Brahmins on top and the Kshatriyas in second place. They say that the Brahmins are born from the mouth of Brahma, whereas the Kshatriyas, the warriors, the aristocrats, the administrative class, are born from the arms and the chest of Brahma. And then the third social group in the Brahminic system are the Vaishyas, or in Pali, the Vaisas. These are the merchants, business class, and the agriculturists, the landowners who owned, land, cattle, other farm animals. And then the fourth social class, the lowest within the class system, are the Shudras, or in Pali, the Sudras. Those are the workers, the menial class, the servants, workers, manual workers. And then below the Shudras are those who are outside the class system. Those are the ones who are called the outcasts. Now they're called the scheduled classes. So those would be people whose social status is so low that they're not even included within the class system. Those would be the people who are responsible for cleaning up the cesspits, the excretions, people who handle corpses, and people who are indigenous people who are not incorporated into the class system of mainstream Indian society. So that is the way Indian society was organized in the time of the Buddha. But the Buddha, he doesn't directly try to overthrow the caste system. He wasn't like a social revolutionary. But in a way, he implies a merging of many of the classes. Because when the Buddha speaks within his own frame of reference, he still speaks about the distinction between the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, putting the Brahmins below the Kshatriyas. But then he groups everybody else together in the class of householders. So if one is not the Kshatriya or a Brahmin, then one is simply designated householder, whether one is a Vaishya, Sudra, or from the lower, those who are outside the class system. Okay, but the sort of more privileged classes would be the Kshatriyas, the Brahmins, and the wealthier householders. Okay, so the Buddha begins here with the Kshatriyas, the class of nobles or aristocrats. And so a bhikkhu might form the aspiration that after death I might be reborn in the company of well-to-do Kshatriyas. It seems a little suspicious to me that the Buddha would be telling a monk to aspire to be reborn in a family, even a family of aristocrats. Because normally monks who don't expect to reach liberation in this life form the aspiration, may I, in my next life, have sort of the primary aspiration is, may I have the opportunity to encounter the Buddha's teaching early in my life and have the opportunity to go forth and become a monk again. So maybe this monk is forming the aspiration to be reborn in a family of well-to-do kshatriyas and then have the opportunity to go forth and become a monk. Just like the Buddha was born into the kshatriya class, and then at the age of 29 he renounced and became an ascetic. Okay, so first one thinks in this way, or one forms the wish, such a wish, but now just having the occasional wish is not a powerful enough supporting factor. And so the Buddha continues and says, he fixes his mind on that, resolves upon it, and develops that wish. So in other words, in order for that wish to become strong enough, a strong enough factor, so that it might determine the mode of rebirth, one has to empower that wish by repeatedly turning the mind to it, by consciously formulating that aspiration, and by making it a kind of fixed determination within the mind. This is a little bit like if one wishes to dig or to create a path through the woods so that one can easily say that there's a house, a woods, and then there's a pond where one can go swimming or enjoy the scenery. It's not enough just once in a while you go through the woods in one place, another time you go through the woods in another place, another time you go through the woods in still a different place. But you have to keep on going through the woods in the same place each time, maybe with a machete through which one could cut away the thickets and the undergrowth. And in this way, one is creating, each time one goes, one is creating a wider and wider path through the woods so that after some time, whenever one wants, one can go through without having to struggle with the undergrowth and the thickets and the thorns and the vines, but one can just walk easily through that woods and get to the pond. And so this is, in a way, it's like creating a grove, not a grove, a groove within the mind, a groove which becomes stronger and stronger so that it becomes a fixed, powerful determination. And so what will then happen at the time of death is that this determination will come to the surface of the mind, and it sort of mobilizes all the other forces within the mind. It becomes like a powerful karma determinant, and it will push or propel the stream of consciousness to a form of rebirth that corresponds to one's wish or aspiration. But for the aspiration to succeed, it needs sufficient supporting conditions. It's like trying to send up a rocket to outer space. So it's not enough just for maybe the NASA, the US Space Agency, to build the rocket. But if the rocket is going to break the force of gravity and go into outer space and maybe send out an explorer which is going to reach Mars or some distant planet in order to explore it, the rocket needs, besides all of the design of the rocket ship and the inner projectile that will be sent into outer space, it needs fuel. If we don't give it sufficient fuel, the rocket won't be able to break the Earth's gravity, and it'll just come plunging back down to Earth. And so for the rocket of the aspiration to reach the particular destination, just like the rocket will reach Mars or Jupiter or Saturn in order to explore those planets. So just as the rocket needs sufficient amount of powerful fuel, so the mind needs sufficiently powerful supporting conditions. And those supporting conditions are provided by the particular virtues that one cultivates in the course of one's human life. And here the Buddha mentions 5 virtues, or 5 excellent qualities that are needed. These 5 good qualities are faith, virtue, learning. Then the word is translated here, generosity and wisdom. And let's look at these a little bit, each of these. First, faith here doesn't mean simply what we call blind belief, but it means, I prefer to sort of gloss the word faith by trust and devotion. And so this, in the case of the monk, a bhikkhu, or could be a nun, a bhikkhuni, it will be faith in the sense of trust in the triple gem, in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, accompanied by spiritual devotion to the triple gem. And so you could say that faith encapsulates the emotional side of the spiritual life. And so faith is not just a matter of intellectual assent, or it's not just a conventional belief because if one is born in a Buddhist community, because everybody else accepts Buddhism. But this means that one has investigated the teaching, and so one appreciates the virtues of the Buddha, the excellent qualities of the Buddha. One has a deep devotion to the Dharma. One has respect and reverence for the Sangha, and one makes this faith and devotion one of the foundations and sort of centers of one's spiritual life. And then this is expressed through taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and in especially contemplating the excellent qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so we have in the Buddha's text, the excellent qualities of the 3 jewels come down in the form of certain formulas. Like for the Buddha, we have the formula that goes iti piso bhagava, that he is the blessed one, the arahat, the perfectly enlightened one, the one who is endowed with knowledge and conduct, and so forth. Then we have the virtues of the Dharma summed up in the formula swakato bhagavata dhammo, that the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and then the virtues of the Sangha summed up in the formula supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho, and so forth, that the community of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing well, practicing properly, practicing the good path, practicing the systematic path, and so on. And so as the mind dwells on the virtues of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, it becomes suffused with trust, faith, and devotion. And that faith and devotion dedicated to the 3 jewels generates a great amount of wholesome karma or merit, which becomes one of the supports for rebirth in accordance with one's wish or aspiration. Then the second virtue here, or the second excellent quality mentioned, here is translated as virtue, which for me now seems too broad, but the Pali word is sila, which has the more specific meaning of virtuous behavior. or good conduct, upright conduct. And so this will be conduct, well, in the broadest terms, not exclusively for a bhikkhu, but for any Buddhist follower, would be at minimum observing the 5 precepts. In the case of monks and nuns, there would be a broader code of precepts or training rules to follow. But the basic purpose of the training rules is to engender within oneself, within one's mind, the disposition towards virtuous types of behavior by abstaining from killing and instead developing kindness and compassion towards living beings, by abstaining from stealing and instead living honestly and in practicing contentment, being satisfied with simple things, living lightly, not demanding or expecting excess of material, of luxuries and conveniences. Then for a lay follower, abstaining from sexual misconduct, so remaining content with one's partner. And then for a monastic person, it means observing celibacy or complete sexual restraint. So this generates the force of purity within the mind. And then the 4th precept is abstaining from false speech, from deliberately telling lies. So this implants in the mind a commitment to truthful speech, to honesty in speech. Then the 5th precept is abstaining from the use of intoxicants, which the use of intoxicants in itself is not so unwholesome, but when one uses intoxicants, first it can create an addiction to them, and then somebody who comes under the influence of intoxicants can break any of the other precepts. So that's the minimal moral code, but then building on top of that, there are larger and wider codes of ethical behavior. So all of those are creating the force of virtuous behavior in the mind. Then comes the word, which is translated here as learning, which is literally, in Pali, it's sutta, which means hearing. Because in the Buddha's time, in order to learn anything, one has to hear it spoken by a teacher. During the Buddha's time, there weren't printed books, and it's even doubtful whether writing was used at all. But after writing and the printing of books or the creation of books came into use, then the word sutta came to refer more broadly to extensive study especially of religious texts. And so the Buddha, in some places, the Buddha criticizes just mere learning without practice. For example, in the 1st chapter of the Dhammapada, the last 2 verses, he says that somebody who has extensive learning but doesn't put the learning into practice is like a man who counts the cows of others but doesn't own the cows himself. You know, if a farmer sees his neighbor has 30 cows and he can count them, 30 cows, he can't use those cows to get milk because they belong to his neighbor, not to himself. But somebody who has just a little bit of learning, puts it into practice, and then gets rid of greed, hatred, and delusion, that is like a farmer who possesses many cows. Okay, so even though the Buddha criticizes abundant learning without practice, but there are many other places where the Buddha praises learning as a virtuous quality within its own right. That is, if one acquires the learning in order to serve as a basis for practice and also as a kind of benefit that one could share with others in order to help others to learn and to practice the Dhamma. Okay, then the next quality is, the Pali word here is chaga, or Sanskrit tyaga. The word actually has two meanings, or two nuances. One nuance is that of generosity. So chaga we might consider to be the psychological counterpart of dana. The word dana means giving, and it refers most specifically to the actual act of giving, as well as to the object itself that is given. And then chaga is, as I said, the psychological counterpart of that. That is, it's the disposition to give. So in English we would render that as generosity. So a person who has chaga as a disposition of the mind would be one who is inclined to practice dana, to practice giving, and to give generously, to give abundantly. So that is one nuance of the word chaga, but the word has another nuance, which I think is more prominent in the Sanskrit counterpart tyaga, and that is relinquishment or renunciation. The ability to give up things that one cherishes, things to which one is inclined to cling. And so the emphasis here is not so much on giving things to others in order to help them, to benefit them, but on giving up the things to which one is attached in order to gain freedom from attachment. And so in the case of lay followers, chaga in the sense of generosity would be more prominent. In the case of monastics, chaga in the sense of relinquishment would be more prominent. But the two are not sort of exclusive, since lay people also practice relinquishment in order to live simply, for example, to resist the craving for material possessions and to give up excessive objects that they acquire. And monks, even though they might not have an abundance of material goods, but monks will give their fellow monastics, they'll give extra robes, food, special offerings that they might receive. And also giving the gift of the Dhamma by teaching the Dhamma is also an expression of generosity. Okay, so this is the practice of chaga, generosity, and relinquishment. And then the fifth, which is perhaps of the five the most important, is wisdom. This is panya, or insight, deep, penetrative insight into the Dhamma. But apparently here, the wisdom has not yet been developed to the level of reaching what's called the paths and the fruits, that is, the stages of realization, except for the very last one in this sutta. Otherwise, I think the Buddha wouldn't express this in terms of an aspiration to be reborn in other higher realms of existence. Okay, so this passage mentions two things necessary to be reborn in accordance with one's aspiration. One is possession of these 5 virtuous qualities, these 5 excellent qualities. The general word used in Pali for excellent qualities or virtues is guna. And so guna is distinct from sila, which is virtuous behavior. The guna is what's translated into Chinese as gongde. And I think maybe the Chinese translators use gongde because it sounds a little bit like the Pali Sanskrit word guna. Because gong by itself means something like effort, doesn't it? And then gong de is virtue. So gongde is effort at virtue. Okay, so the two things one needs to be reborn according to one's aspiration. One is possession of the 5 gunas, 5 excellent qualities. And then the other is a strong, fixed determination. A determination which has been fixed in the mind, frequently resolved upon, and developed. If one has the virtuous qualities, but doesn't form the aspiration, then one will simply be reborn in accordance with one's karma, but not in any definite place, in any definite mode of rebirth. If one has the strong aspiration, but doesn't have a sufficient collection of supporting conditions by way of the virtues, in fact, if one sort of neglects all of these virtues, but just has a strong aspiration, then all we can say is tough luck. Maybe this is the common in the Buddhist societies. You know, the guy says, may I be, he goes to religious functions, and everybody is reciting, may I be reborn in the Tusita heaven and meet the Bodhisattva Maitreya there. And then when he goes out of the temple, he goes drinking, and then he leaves his wife and goes to his girlfriend, and then he goes hunting and fishing, or gets involved in dishonest business deals, which deprive his competitor of a fair chance of success. And then he goes back to the temple and may I be reborn in Tusita heaven and meet Maitreya Bodhisattva. When he passes away, where is he going to be reborn? It's like building a very beautiful rocket ship, and they put water or kerosene in the fuel tank, and then they light it, and it's just going to burn up, and the rocket will collapse. Okay, so he fixes his mind on it, resolves upon it, develops it. Okay, so then the Buddha says, these aspirations and this abiding of his, I think by the abiding of his means frequently dwelling in faith, virtue, learning, generosity, and wisdom, thus developed and cultivated, lead to his rebirth there. So this is the path, the way that leads to reappearance or to rebirth there. What does this note say? Love it. Okay, it just says the way is the 5 qualities together with the aspiration. Okay, so this is for rebirth in the company of well-to-do kshatriyas or aristocrats. Then come the next 2 passages are concerned with rebirth in the company of well-to-do Brahmins and the company of well-to-do householders. Okay, next passage is concerned with, now what follows in the sutta is going to take us on a kind of tour through the different realms of existence, the higher realms of existence, in the Buddhist picture of the cosmos or universe. So now we come to so these are the first paragraphs deal with a favorable or a fortunate rebirth in the human realm. The next paragraphs are concerned with a favorable rebirth in the 6 heavens of the sense sphere. And to get some idea of what is being discussed here, maybe we have to map out a little bit the Buddhist cosmos. Okay, this is a very rough and broad picture of the Buddha's cosmos. And so we have 3 realms of existence. These are the sensual realm, or sometimes it's called the desire realm. And this is subdivided into the bad destinations and the good destinations. Those of you who came for the Abhidhamma course and you have the Abhidhamma book, you have a chart showing this in detail in the comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. So you don't have to worry about taking notes on this unless you want to reinforce your memory. Okay, so the bad destinations are usually mentioned 3 bad destinations. That is the hell realm, the realm of the animals, the animal kingdom, and then the realm of the afflicted spirits, sometimes called hungry ghosts. And then in the sensual realm, there are 2 good destinations. One is the human realm. But sometimes it's hard to believe that the human realm is a good destination because there's a lot of misery in the human realm. And then there are 6 heavenly realms of the sense sphere. 6 sense realm heavens. Those will be mentioned here as we go through the sutta. Then above the sensual realm,